Hey everyone, this is Acterys here, Managing Director of Architecture and Platforms here at FP Automation. Welcome back to our series on government contract planning within Microsoft Fabric, powered by Acterys for planning. In this video, we are going to be talking about pool rate calculations, which are an extremely essential part of any government contracting process in order to figure out what the all-in dollar rate is you need to charge for every dollar of labor you are charging on a project to understand what sort of profit you need to charge on top of that in order for your projects to be profitable. Before I get into the contents of this video, I want to quickly recap on our previous video where we talked about indirect labor planning. In our previous video, indirect labor planning was done at a non-project level. So for our fringe and overhead expenses, which are tied to certain organizations, which have projects associated with that organization, we were planning those expenses which ultimately need to be factored into the projects associated with that org. And finally, for the G&A expenses, which are at a full-wide company level, those expenses will need to be factored for all companies across for all projects within the company across the organization. In this video, we're going to be talking about our pool rate calculations where we are doing the math to be able to solve for every dollar of labor we charge, how much we need to charge for fringe, overhead, and G&A, which would form our fully burdened rate. What's happening behind the scenes when we are running these calculations is we are actually programming them within our database in order to rerun what is very similar to what Deltek and Uninet are doing, which is the fully burdened rate calculation for our projects that we're forecasting for the future based on our direct labor, non-labor, and indirect labors, specifically for costs that can be allocated. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to quickly explain how the math is working for you so that you understand from a back-end perspective what we are doing. The way this is working, and I'll use organization number one as an example right here, is we are first taking all of the direct labor related to all projects that are tagged to organization one here. What we're then doing is we're taking the fringe, which is at an organization level, and allocating it to all projects based on the weight of each project's direct labor within that organization. So in other words, if I have a project that has 40% of the direct labor within organization number one, and the other two projects have 30% spread between them of the remaining direct labor, we're going to take the fringe and allocate it to those projects based on their direct labor portions. And what we find right here is that for every dollar of labor within organization number one right here, we need to charge 33 cents on top of the direct labor we're charging in order to remain profitable based on fringe. Now, where it gets tricky is when we get into overhead and eventually G&A. For overhead, in order to calculate overhead, you first need to calculate fringe and then add that into the direct labor portion of the projects in that organization. So essentially, if we take the fringe that was allocated plus the direct labor, and then we go ahead and look at the weights of each project, this would then allow us to allocate overhead according to each project. So in this case, what we're saying here is for every dollar that we charge in direct labor, we also need to charge 69 cents on top of that in order to be able to break even for fringe and overhead combined. And finally, we have G&A. For G&A, we need to be able to take both the fringe and the overhead calculations that we had done at a project level and also include the direct labor as well as the direct non-labor portions, add those together, and then understand the weights of all projects within the organization in order to be able to allocate the G&A expenses that were done at a company level across all organizations. And what this essentially then allows us to do is spread that G&A to all projects across all organizations. So now, for every dollar of direct labor and non-labor we charge, we also need to charge 11 cents on top of that for G&A. This allows us then to formulate our fully burdened rate. And our fully burdened rate is essentially a mathematical calculation where we take 1 plus the fringe rate times 1 plus the overhead rate times 1 plus the G&A rate in order to get our fully burdened rate. So what this says right here is for every dollar of labor, we need to charge $2.51 in order to be able to break even on this project from a labor standpoint. And then on the flip side, for non-labor, for every dollar of non-labor we charge, we need to charge 11 cents on G&A in order to be able to break even. That's how we're getting the math in order to figure out what our total revenue needs to look like just to be able to break even on costs on here. So the way we do this is we leverage Acterys to be able to rerun our indirect allocations so that we can spread our indirect labor costs across our projects. And our checks right here are essentially checking that fringe, overhead, and G&A are all tying. You can see, for example, the G&A is not tying. In addition, we also have at the top right here a run history showing when we last ran this. So when I hit save right here, and I go ahead and rerun this calculation, which should take no more than a few seconds here, we can see that the calculation has now ran. We can see that that's now valid. Then we can see we're now balancing. And how we know that this is working is because if we take each of our organizations and we look at each of the costs which are now done at a project level, we can see that these are tying out exactly to the original fringe, overhead, and G&A amounts that we did at an org and company level, which then sets us up to be able to do revenue planning accordingly for each project and based on its project type. And the types that we're going to be looking at are cost plus, T&M, as well as firm fixed pricing. So I hope you enjoyed this video here. Again, it's very important because this is how government contractors are able to get comfortable with their numbers, as well as get auditors comfortable with how exactly they're charging for projects on top of understanding which projects are profitable. This can be a make or break for organizations because if they're able to see this level of visibility into their expenses, they truly know what projects are profitable and not profitable to the organization, helping to save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for the organization by having data at their fingertips to make the right decisions. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, and this is Alp signing out.